our next part on doing our padding system is connecting our pads with our joints. What do I mean by this? Well, if I grab something in the back and I move back and forth, or any joint in the back, the neck should definitely move along with the clavicle systems. So as you can see, we have all the systems padded already. And what we're going to do is we're going to connect the next system up here to the last system of our joint chain here. Because when I move this joint, the neck should move. So I'm going to expand all the way down to our waist joint. And how we're going to do is we're going to go into our constraint menu. So if I go up here and put constraint, I'm going to go into the parent constraint settings. Okay, so our tool is pretty much set here. We're going to keep our tool at default. The main thing is if you've been playing around with this tool, make sure that this maintain offset is clicked on, which it is by default. Okay, so I'm just going to make this a little smaller here. Okay, so how we're going to do is a constraint works is we grab our driver object first. In other words, the waist joint here is going to move the neck. And then I am going to hold down Command and select on the neck pad. And we'll never do a constraint from a joint to a joint. It's always going to be from a joint to a pad. So here's, let's see, let's look for our neck. There it is, our center neck. I'm holding down Command and I click. It is very important to note here, I am not holding down Shift. Shift would select all of them, which would cause a very, very big issue. We're selecting our waist, hold down Command and select our pad. And then I'm going to say Apply. Now you'll notice that the pad itself has a constraint. Now you notice here we see this dot dot dot. This means that multiple things are still selected. When we do a constraint, it does not unselect after it applies its constraint. So in other words, if I rotate right now, the system is going to blow up and go crazy. And it might not even go back when you undo it. So the first thing is that this constraint is on there because I can see blue bars up here. So I'm going to click away and then I'm going to click on the pad. There we go. Then I'm on my neck pad. Now you see we got these blue bars. This shows that it is constrained, that it is being manipulated by another system. Now we're going to have more time to cover constraints in a future podcast, but right now it's always going to be the driver object, which is the joint, and then the driven object, which is the pad. You can't do this in your perspective view because if I select my end joint here and then I shift select my joint, I am not selecting, I'm selecting the joint to joint. And we always want to be the joint's a driver for the pad itself. Think of these pads right here, these groups, as cartilage. These are the connecting areas from it. So as I've been talking here, you might have noticed that the actual joint end here is purple. That means it's being influenced. You can see when I move back and forth, any joint in our back, because the waist is actually influencing the joint pad for the system. So let's go on and keep on doing this where clavicles need to be connected. Now you're not always going to connect right to an end joint or a waist joint. You might connect something to a middle joint. Now, if I bring back my geometry here, this is the last joint of real influence on this little system right here. When I move this joint back and forth, the clavicle should move. Now, I'm not going to do this to the waist. I'm going to do it to this joint here because this one makes the most sense. So with this one selected, I am going to hold down Command and select our left clavicle, which is all the way up here. And then I'm going to say Apply. Now remember the both still selected, so I'm going to unselect, click on my area, and you can see how the actual clavicle is moving. Now, I always get this question, can I select a bunch of things and then hit the driver, hit the joint, select a bunch of things to constrain them? You cannot. You have to do this one at a time until you learn how to script and to build tools to do better work. We still have to do it this way. So I'm going to select our joint and then select our right clavicle and say Apply. There we go. And as you can see, when I move any joint in my joint system under that, all three of these joints go. Now I'd have to go through and connect the actual last joint of the clavicle to the pad for the arm, and same thing for the last of the arm to the hand. And your language can get pretty difficult with explaining this. That's why I always use driver and driven. The driver object is driving the driven object at the end. So it's the last thing it's selected here. Okay, so problems that can be made. If you invert these order, like let's say I select the end joint here, and then I select the actual joint itself, and I hit Apply, you'll notice that everything looks great. It is moving our arm. But when I actually look at the pad for that arm, it doesn't have constraints on it. It's just blank. Where if I look at the pads, like the pad for the neck, we see constraints. And if I see the pad for the clavicle, I see constraints. And then the arm, it's not, and it's not, and it's not, and it's not. Okay, so how do I fix this? And a quick way when I grade this is I'll select joints randomly, anything that should be a connecting system. And if I see a constraint, I'm like, that's wrong. That's going to break something in the future. So how do I get rid of a constraint that was improperly connected? Well, I can go in and go into the object that actually has been constrained. So you see here's our blue bars. And right below it, we see this little line. It comes down. That exclamation mark is the little icon for constraint. So to delete it, I just select it, hit delete, and it's disconnected. So I'm going to do this again. I'm going to select the arm end, and then I'm going to select, hold down Command and select the pad and hit apply. And there we go. Cool. Another common thing is that someone will actually select the pad first. So let's see, I go in here and I select, let's say I'm selecting the pad for the hand, and to make that the driver to the last joint in the arm. So this is a very common one to do. And apply, and you'll notice that it's actually on the end joint, not on the actual pad itself. So in this case, I would go through and I would say, okay, the end joint has the constraint, and you can even see the name on the constraint. It says left arm 0.3 waist. That's what the constraint is actually on, and it tells you the type of constraint. And when we select on that constraint, if you look over, you'll see it says left hand 0 on pad. That's what it's connected to, and that's not correct. The waist should not be connected to the hand. It's the other way around. So in this case, I would make sure I had my pad. I'd go grab my waist, hold down Command, select my pad, and hit apply. Very, very base thing is that if I select my arm, any part of my arm, the whole system should move. If I select the back, pretty much everything should move. The neck, the head, and so forth. Always kind of check and move and then reset it. If you move something, if you move the back and then the rest of the system doesn't move, then check to see where it stops being influencing. Make sure that if it's actually a pad, that say, okay, well, let's check the arm. Say, okay, there's no constraints on there, so I select on the pad. I see the constraints, that's good. I can move down, and then constraint information will pop up underneath whatever is being constrained. So we can see left arm 0.3 waist. That actually means it's connected to the waist joint arm. That's correct. So if I go up to my arm, there's nothing on the arm. I press up, and you see how it moved up to my pad. And I go through and say this is connected to the left 2 waist, the clavicle. And I can select my clavicle and move up and say the same thing. Here's my center back 0.3 bind. That's what it's connected to. It's not a waist, but that is completely okay because this is the last joint that really makes sense in our system. So we go through the rest of our systems, connecting them up in this manner. And at the end of the day, we'll have all these pads here. These should all be grouped together. I'm going to grab them, hit Command G, and this will be our joints group, like that. And that's our end of our connecting. So we pad them, we connect them together. These can be disconnected and reconnected very easily. So if we need to add a new system, or if we find out a joint layout and our neck is wrong or our arm is wrong, we can just remove that system, redraw it, and reconnect in this manner. It makes it very quick to troubleshoot our systems.